Children have died on the streets of Minneapolis this year. People have shot them. I don't want to use passive voice. We don't know who they are, and they're still out there. People are dying by the hundreds and the thousands of COVID-19, and people still insist on fighting the vaccine and resisting it. The Trump administration happened, and we're still feeling the effects. There is the Taliban and the Aryan Nation, Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, Derek Chauvin. I would find it so much easier to be a universalist if it weren't for all the other people. There are so many people that I can be so angry at. And universalism would be so much easier if it were not so damned universal. So when I came up with the idea for this particular sermon, it was kind of as a part two to the one I did a month ago about universalism. And it was a user guide, how to be a universalist. I've been a universalist my entire adult life. I've thought about it for some of that adult life. How hard could this be? I should never start a sermon with that idea. Because, look, universalism is this big, beautiful theology. It is a theology of hope. It is a theology of connection. But the trouble with big, beautiful ideas is that while we like to hold them up to the light and look at them and polish them off every now and then, we can be afraid to get them dirty, muddy them with too much reality. Now, faith needs big ideas. These ideas challenge us to consider what is most important to us and why it's important. They give us a framework for shaping and reshaping our values and meaning. They help us to change our minds when it is time to change our minds. But theoretical, poetic theology is not enough, at least not for me. Theology needs a place in the world, in our real lives. There's a Zen saying, words don't cook rice. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, can universalism boil water? So you cook rice, right? I think it can. But the how is a challenge for me. At least putting it into words is. I was at this all day yesterday. I haven't spent this much time trying to write one of these sermons in a long time. The obvious, or what I think is the obvious, is so much harder to talk about. Now, if universalism is going to cook rice, it needs to incorporate two potentially conflicting notions, at least in my mind. The first is that everyone has inherent worth and dignity and should be welcome in the human community. Everyone. And the second is that a lot of people do a lot of things to make it very hard to see their worth and dignity. So how do we blend these realities? I have some ideas. I'm not sure they're good ones, and I'm sure they don't cover everything. Life is too messy and too complicated for me to do that in 10 to 45 minutes, depending on how far off script I go. But I think I can give us a place to start, a foundation for bringing our universalist faith to just about any situation, or perhaps more to the point, to any person. Universalism is rooted in love. Love for everyone. Now, it's easy to say that for all of you, for my wife, for my family, for people who I know are suffering, even mostly for the abstract stranger. But universalism is rooted in love for people we really, really don't like, at least if we're going to take it seriously. Now, for that to work, I think we need to reconsider maybe what we mean by the word love. UU Minister Kate Braestrup wrote a book about that. It's called Marriage and Other Acts of Charity. And its application in the real world. And in that book, she shared a definition I believe can fuel a practical universalist theology. It's this: to earnestly desire the achievement of wholeness by the beloved. To earnestly desire the achievement of wholeness by the beloved, which, if we're being universalist about it, is everyone. Note what it doesn't say. It does not say to give the gift of wholeness to the beloved or to impose wholeness upon the beloved. As Braestrup writes, love doesn't require us to be friends with everyone. Love really has just that one absolute implacable demand. And to desire the achievement of wholeness by the beloved is not the same as being able to assist in that achievement, let alone impose it. Whether any particular person, any particular beloved achieves wholeness, and this can be the hard part, folks, is not up to us. It is not ours to give. It is not ours to impose. It must be achieved by the beloved. Now we have a role. We can help create the circumstances that let them achieve it if they so choose. Or at the very least, we can not get in the way. I am not saying that loving people in this way, earnestly desiring their achievement of wholeness, that means we have to put up with whatever they do in the meantime. This is not a hippie flower child kumbaya sort of love. We're not going to just change the world by giving everybody hugs and making them feel better about themselves. For one thing, some of us aren't huggers. Now, what I'm talking about is what I've heard some Buddhists call fierce compassion. Doing what must be done to protect ourselves and to protect others without inflicting any more harm than is absolutely necessary. And the Buddhists who talk about this talk about intention. What are you doing and why are you doing it? What is behind your action? If you stop someone from causing harm, to stop harm, and only that can be an act of love. If you stop someone from acting out, from causing harm because you are angry at them and you want to just let that anger out, that isn't an act of compassion or love. The result might be the same, but intention guides our action. It is walking a line between allowing our compassion to just enable bad behavior, what some Buddhists call idiot compassion, and striking out in anger or vengeance, which can be a powerful urge. It is not a line that is easily walked. Compassion is hard. Pema Chodron writes that compassion threatens our ego because we have to get ourselves out of the way. Years ago, I practiced a martial art called Aikido. I was drawn to it because it is a purely defensive martial art form. If two Aikidoists were to face off in a match, nothing would happen. They would just look at each other. There are no attacks in Aikido. But if an Aikidoist is attacked, or if there's an attack happening to someone else that they may need to intervene in. They have skills to control the attacker. But what's built into Aikido is this idea of controlling the attacker, to defend without causing injury. And when the attacker is no longer a threat, to walk away. Its founder taught that to injure an opponent is to injure yourself. To control aggression without inflicting injury is the art of peace. It is a difficult art to learn. I wasn't that great at it. And perhaps, ironically, or maybe it's poetic, Aikido has a higher rate of injury than most other martial arts in its training. To love your enemy enough to counter them without harming them takes skill. It takes work. And it takes some risk. But this also teaches us that loving enemies does not mean merely conceding to them. As Brother David Steindl-Rast, a Benedictine monk who studied Zen Buddhism, I believe to some extent with Thomas Merton, has written, to love our enemies does not mean that we suddenly become their friends. If it is our enemies we are to love, they must remain enemies. Unless you have enemies, you cannot love them. By having convictions, we make ourselves the enemies of those who oppose those convictions. And loving an enemy is not at odds with holding to our convictions. As Buddhist teacher Sharon Salzberg writes, practicing kindness doesn't at all mean that we will like everybody or acquiesce to everything that he or she does. It doesn't mean that we will become complacent or passive about naming wrongdoing as wrong or about seeking change, sometimes very forcefully, with our whole heart. Okay, I'm back in those big, beautiful ideas territory. So, Chad, what do we do? How do we love the difficult, the frustrating, the maddening, the disappointing, and the hateful? I don't know. But I've got some pointers for places to start. Because in my life, I've had to do it. I think we all have. I have known murderers. One of my first clients when I was working in as a lawyer representing kids in foster care killed a man. He was 17 years old. I can love that person because I already knew him. I don't always get that. I seldom get that luxury. So I try to draw from that experience as I think about the people I don't know that are making me angry. And so here's what I've got. Some of these are my ideas. Some of them come from people who have thought about this stuff a lot longer than I have. Let's start with this. When you judge people, judge carefully. I'm not going to tell you not to judge because, as Rachel Newman said in this morning's reading, you're human beings. That's not possible. It literally is not possible. Our brains are designed to judge constantly. It's kind of how we got to be here today. I mean, it's just evolution, folks. But know that you are judging. Think about where your judgment is coming from. What in your experience, in your story, is creating the preconceptions that are filtering your perceptions? And never lose sight of the fact that you have preconceptions that are filtering your perceptions. Next, no matter how infuriating they are, never forget the other person's humanity. Pick a person, somebody you actually know or somebody you just know of, that you just cannot take. I'll give you a second. I have a feeling we're all, many of us are picturing the same person. I've got several that I could pick in this. Now remember, that person is a human being, just like us. Like it or not, they are no more and no less human than we are, as monstrous as they seem. And friends, I struggle with this one, and I have preached it more than once. I've done whole sermons on this. Now, Brother David, he suggests that it may help to visualize your enemies as the children they once were. He snidely also throws in a parenthetical, and somehow remain. Little snide for a monk, I think, but I have been trying in recent years, let's say maybe since 2016, with mixed success, to stop calling someone who does terrible things a terrible person, even in my own mind. It's a small idea, a small thing, maybe, but I want to make myself see that they are, more than anything, a person with facets that I do not see. A person who does terrible things can also be a person who does beautiful things. A terrible person, I've just written off as terrible. So if you can, Sharon Salzberg urges, pay attention, pay full attention, and really look at and listen to someone you usually ignore or find annoying. Be open to their story. We expect them to be open to ours, after all. And the marriage amendment in this state went down because people were open to the stories of, well, I think everybody that got on the phones, but particularly the gay and lesbian people who just wanted marriage. And because enough people heard that story, we were one of the first states to vote one of those monstrosities down. It goes both ways, folks. We should hear their stories too. Doesn't mean we have to change what we think, but we should hear the stories. Don't assume you know their story. This I get all the time, and I'm a lawyer by profession. I'm constantly telling my clients, don't assume you know what's going on in the other person's head, what their motivation is, or what their whole story is. If you can learn their story, that's great. But if you can't, don't let yourself forget that you don't know it. And don't make one up. Now, in the end, knowing the story may not make that much of a difference for you, but it might. I mean, part of my job as a lawyer is mediation, a process that gives people in conflict a chance, with the help of a mediator, to hear from each other directly, to just tell the story of the conflict from their perspective. Each party gets time to talk, and the other one is asked to sit and listen. Now, it doesn't always work, but pretty often, far more than 50% of the time, we get agreements. And in a lot of these sessions, I will see a light bulb go off while somebody's listening. Just a little, oh, I didn't know that. When they didn't know the other person's story, they just made one up. And when you make up the story about the other becomes the villain who is acting out of some sort of malice. But sometimes if they let themselves hear that full story, the malice disappears. Or not. Look, sometimes people really are out to get each other for stupid and petty reasons. That's the mixed bag of humanity, folks. And sometimes it's for terrible or hateful reasons, reasons that are hard to forgive. Open racism, blatant sexism, threats of violence, homophobia, transphobia. The worst aspects of humanity have crawled out from the rocks in our souls over the last several years. They've always been there. They just found the light of day. reminded us that they're there. The people embracing that hate, that ignorance, well, they make universalism a challenge. I mean, what does universalism do with hate on that level? You know what? If I believed in God, this would be a whole lot easier. I think the early universalists had it easy, at least, and modern universalists who are Christian. Compared to me, I think have a way to share that responsibility. We can, if I believed in God, I could let that higher, wiser power sort all this out. But I don't. At least not in the sense of a conscious power that watches over this life and the next. This is the life we have. This is the kingdom of heaven. Or it's not, but it's up to us. I believe if there's anything like God, we create that power by how we live together. God is love, but only if we make it that way. And I am a universalist because I refuse to give up on the possibility of that love, which still doesn't tell us how to deal with hate. I know. How we make room in a universalist theology for hateful, even evil people. And I don't have a complete answer to this. I mean, I had the whole internet open to me yesterday and it didn't have an answer. But maybe a partial answer comes from that definition of love from Kate Braestrup. We can desire that even these people trapped in hate will someday achieve wholeness. But even as we hope that for them, we have to know that we can't give it to them or impose it on them. We have to accept there are limits to what we can do for them without turning those limits into excuses to do nothing or to cause more harm in the world by meeting their hate with our own. And it is so hard sometimes not to throw our anger back at them. And I know I'd be really good at it. I can be much more clever and mean than they are. I want to mock and belittle them, insult them, and if I'm honest, punch them. I know in my mind, in my heart, that Thich Nhat Hanh is right, that they are suffering. And that it is their suffering and pain that pushes them to pour more pain out into the world. Sometimes it's just so hard to see that. Sometimes it's just hard to care. But the thing about being a human is that even if I don't want to care sometimes, I can want to care. And that's what universalism calls me to do. And we should care if we can. We should let that caring guide our actions. Let them see us being open and loving, if not forgiving. Support and respect and love the people they hate. Smile, sing, dance, or just look at these rage-filled people, shake our heads, and walk away. Now, that may not have the immediate, visceral satisfaction of screaming back at them or writing a clever line on Facebook or Twitter or whatever is going on these days. But it does show them there's another way to live. And it leaves that way open to them. And in the end, that open door is the core of universalism. Professor Loretta Ross, a Black feminist survivor of sexual assault who has toured the country with a reformed member of the Aryan Nation and sat across a table from men convicted of rape to share her story and listen to theirs. She remembers a lesson she learned from a civil rights leader decades ago. When you ask people to give up hate, you have to be there for them when they do. And that, perhaps more than anything, is what it means to be a universalist. To allow reconciliation, to be there, to not give up hope in any human being, even knowing that they may never choose to live in that hope. Because ours is no caravan of despair. May it be so.